Hi, this is Scott Horne with the Owner Finance Network, and here with me today is Susan Tierney. Hi,
hey.
Susan. And this is our segment on residential mortgage loan originators, or more often known as the RMLO. And an RMLO is part of the owner finance transaction in today's compliance-based industry out there. It simply is something we have to know, work with, and utilize.
Okay.
So with that, let's just get right into it, okay?
So we know what it is they do, but what is their actual role in the owner finance industry? So you go back, Susan, prior to 2008, 2009, there wasn't a term RMLO. In fact, there was no reason to necessarily process a buyer in an owner finance transaction. Now, I will say that it was always wise to do it because you want to know who your borrower is, you want to know what their income is, and make certain things, make the monthly payments, right? Right.
Makes common sense. I will also tell you that by processing a buyer, if you were in the game of buying and selling mortgages, you would want to have that financial information available because it would help you make additional dollars if you were selling a mortgage out there. Your note buyer wants to know who is the buyer and what do they look like on paper.
Okay.
Then comes the real estate crash of 2008, 2009, and they implemented the SAFE Act, I believe, in 2013, and they created this new term, residential mortgage loan originator, which is really a fancy name for a loan officer.
Okay.
In the industry. The purpose of that was to have a national tracking system for them, and of course, everybody's got to be licensed here in Texas.
And they have to be licensed in their particular state, so they can only be an RMLO in one state.
I don't know that exactly, but I believe you can only be in one state, but I'm sure you can be licensed in many states.
Okay. And who do they work for?
So the RMLO is there to process the buyer. They're probably going to work for the seller who's selling the property. Maybe it's an investor in many cases. And their job is to obtain financial information on the borrower. They are to ask that borrower for all the various things they need to put together a package that goes into a program so that the RMLO can then gather that package and give it to the seller, who, by the way, in owner financing is the lender, right?
Okay.
So that seller, lender, can make an informed decision on whether to approve or disapprove their borrower.
Okay.
Or ask for more information.
Should you always be processed by an RMLO? And if yes, why?
Well, here at the Owner Finance Network, we believe the answer is yes on every single deal that you do.
Okay.
Now, in most states, under the SAFE Act guidelines, if you just do one transaction, you must be licensed, or you must incorporate the residential mortgage loan originator into the transaction.
Okay.
When the SAFE Act came down, Texas created what is called T-SAFE, or Texas SAFE, and they created a 5 property or fewer de minimis rule. So if you did 5 or fewer transactions in a 12-month period, you were not under the SAFE Act. It's kind of like the Dodd-Frank Act that's out there also. If you do 5 or fewer transactions, you're not under the Dodd-Frank Act. Now, we believe that even though you may not be under those specific guidelines, you should always adhere to them.
Okay.
Now, one thing that investors and sellers often misinterpret is that under RESPA, which is the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, there is a 3 property de minimis rule, which means if you do 3 or more transactions in a 12-month period, you must provide your borrower all the RESPA disclosures. Well, that's what the RMLO does, is what's part of their transaction, is to provide them all the transactions as required under the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act.
Okay.
So there's always been this misnomer that if you did 5 or fewer transactions, you didn't have to comply with the SAFE Act. The bottom line answer, it really was 3 or more. And today, Susan, with a new law that has come down in Texas effective January the 1st, it became 3 anyway.
Okay.
And so, but even though there is that rule out there that if you do 3 or fewer transactions in 12 months, you don't necessarily have to process the buyer, I will just tell you, it is an extremely wise thing to do to process that buyer every time.
Right.
Let me tell you why. One, we want to ensure that our borrower has the ability to repay the loan. That's probably one of the most important things that we as a seller in the owner finance industry have to do.
Yes.
What we don't want to do is put a buyer in a property who can't afford it and be accused of predatory lending. I don't ever want to walk up in front of a courtroom and tell some judge I took this large down payment from a buyer knowing they couldn't afford the house,
Right.
just so I could keep their down payment. And what's a shame is that still happens even today after this has been ongoing now for some 8+ years.
Right. That's a bummer.
Yeah.
And we do see that happen a lot. So what documents does an RMLO collect from the buyer? I know you start with, the first one is the 1003 for
Yeah.
your
Now, a
mortgage.
1003 is simply a standard Fannie Mae loan application that's used
Okay.
nationwide. It's changed over the years a little bit. Today it's about, gosh, I think 5 or 6 pages long. It used to be, I think, 3 or 4. But it starts with getting an application. We like to use that one because it's standardized. The RMLO is going to try to collect tax returns if they have them, bank statements if they have them. They're going to get W-2s, maybe a VOE, which is a verification of employment, a VOR, which is a verification of rent, and maybe if they're in an existing mortgage, a VOM, as they call it, a verification of mortgage. The goal is to gather as much information as possible so we can ensure what that borrower's financial information is.
Okay.
Because one of the things we have to do in today's regulatory climate is we must ensure that not only does our borrower have the ability to make the payments, we have to consider and verify what that borrower provides to us along the way. Those are some of the guidelines that are Dodd-Frank, and they kind of mesh together a little bit.
Okay.
This RMLO package that is put together helps the investor, the seller, do just that.
Okay, so what's the time frame? If I'm gathering and I get all my information to the RMLO, what does that look like? What's the time frame?
Sure. Well, initially, once the RMLO takes the application, it's very important to understand a seller should not take the application unless they're acting as an underwriter. It needs to be the RMLO to take and sign the application with the borrower. And there's some various rules about that under RESPA as well as the Truth in Lending Act. And so once that application is taken, within the first 3 days, the RMLO has to send to the borrower 3 documents. One, and most importantly, is the loan estimate that walks through the transaction based upon the contract and the terms that have been negotiated so that that borrower knows what to expect and anticipate when they're buying the home.
Okay.
And there's a handbook and also a servicing disclosure that goes along with that. Now, after that 3 days, the RMLO is still putting together the information, and there's going to be about a 7-day period from the completion of everything before you can actually close that transaction.
7 after the 3 days?
Well,
Or
I
is
like
it included in
it
the
may
3
be
days?
included within those 3 days if you
Okay.
can move quick enough.
Okay.
But what I like to always suggest to our clients in the marketplace is think of it as 10 days, an initial 3 days and then 7 days. Why? It gives your borrower an opportunity to review the paperwork, review what's going on, actually read their contract, maybe take a moment and consult either a realtor, a financial advisor, or an attorney to make sure they understand exactly what they're getting into when they're buying a home.
Okay. Does that include weekends? Like is the 7-day just the week, Monday through Friday, and then you start back and you do 2 more days the next week, or does it include the weekends?
Well, I believe that total time frame includes all the business days that the lender is open.
Except for a holiday. I heard that.
Except for Sundays and holidays,
Okay. Okay.
and legal holidays.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so then what is a DTI?
A DTI. Well, DTI stands for debt to income ratio. And in the lending world, there's what is called a front end ratio and a back end. And the front end ratio is simply a ratio of the borrower's monthly mortgage payment, principal, interest, taxes, insurance, HOA, divided by their income. Now, the back end ratio is their mortgage payment, principal, interest, tax, insurance, HOA, plus any reoccurring debt they have. If they have a credit card payment that's reoccurring, that's included. If they have a car payment included, That's reoccurring. That's part of the deal, divided by the income. And ratios are very important in the owner finance world and in the mortgage lending world. For instance, if you go to, let's say, a Bank of America or a Wells Fargo, they work off of a 28% front end and a 36% back end ratio. If you're applying for an FHA loan, they work off of a 31% front end and a 43% back end ratio. In the seller finance world, we don't really have a ratio to follow. What we have is a reasonableness standard that was set up for us. It doesn't say we must follow a specific standard. Now, does that mean we go off and approve a buyer who has a 70% debt to income ratio? No.
No.
They can't afford the house.
Right.
Does that mean we have to follow a 43% back-end ratio, which is what the big banks usually are required to follow to be a qualified mortgage? We call that a QM mortgage. No. Does that mean, but we want to be somewhere in between, and every deal is different. Let me give you an example. If you have someone who makes $10,000 a month and their mortgage payment, let's say, is $4,000 a month, they've got $6,000, excuse me, my nose is itching, left over as disposable income. Well, if you got somebody who only makes $3,000 a month and they're making a $1,500 a month mortgage payment, they've only got $1,500 a month left over as disposable income to pay for food, bills, kids, cars, everything else. Think about it. So there's a floating standard to look at that I think that the seller, investor, lender needs to be reasonable and understand those along the way.
Okay. And then once you have all that information, does the RMLO tell you, yes, you should do this, or no, you shouldn't?
Absolutely not. That is one of the biggest misnomers in the marketplace, is that the RMLO is there to approve your borrower. They are not.
They are not. They have no say.
Well, no, they don't. Because the seller, who is the lender, is also the underwriter, which means they are the final decision maker. The RMLO's job is to assimilate information from the borrower, put it into a proper package, provide that borrower proper disclosures, and then the lender, as the underwriter, makes the final decision.
Okay.
RMLOs are not licensed to make those decisions, but so many investors think that the RMLO gives their blessings. And I'll say this also, there are a lot of RMLOs who try to insert themselves into that role. And I don't know why they necessarily try to do that, whether it's trying to make them feel a little bit more important or not, or more needed. Unfortunately, the RMLO, as I kind of call it, is a necessary evil in today's world, because the SAFE Act made it so.
Okay.
And as things progress with more compliance issues, it may become more and more important.
Right.
But they're not the decision maker.
Okay. So now the RMLO gives all the information back to the lender, and then from there, what, you know, does the lender, what does it cost to do all of this? And who pays, the lender or the buyer?
Well, first off, who pays? Fully negotiable.
Okay.
Lender can pay,
Who
buyer can
usually
pay.
pays? Usually
Well,
it's
usually
the
the
buyer.
buyer pays.
Okay.
But if the interest rate is getting a little bit too high, and a lot of investors push interest rates sometimes, the RMLO fees is part of the APR, or the annual percentage rate, which is one of the things that has to be considered when making a loan of this nature. And sometimes, if that fee pushes them over the threshold, I like to inform investors they should raise their sales price maybe by the amount of the RMLO package, add that to the down payment, and let them pay it. It's now taken out of the equation completely.
Oh, okay.
But it's a factoring issue that has to be understood and thought about throughout the process a little bit.
Okay. So what
Now,
is
RMLO fees vary throughout the marketplace a little bit. I know here at the Owner Finance Network and Owner Finance Loan Processing and Lending is about $1,150 from start to finish. And there's a lot of work that goes into this. It is communicating with the borrower, getting all this information. And so often it comes in piecemeal. Having to hold their hands to help them gather more information along the way, and sometimes structure letters to put those together as well, to get
I
enough
just understand
information.
the process. So many of them don't understand it, and I know I've see them walking them through and holding their hand and.
It is. It's a process that the general public doesn't understand. I know that more sophisticated home buyers may understand it, or they're picking up a lot easier, but a lot of others simply don't. And so the RMLO is there to help explain the process, sometimes answer just basic questions about, hey, you're really buying this house.
Right.
You're going to have a loan, you're obligated to pay it, but it's going to be your home. Well, great, that's not a problem to say those kind of things. But their job is to gather the information and get it all put together so that the investor, the seller, can make that informed decision along the way. Now, some RMLOs will prepare the closing disclosure, a CD. A lot of closing agents do that for free. For instance, here at the Interfinance Network, our law firm, Horne & Associates, does that for free, and it's just part of the package together. But it's a fee that usually is passed on to the buyer, which is traditional to the mortgage industry as well.
Okay, great. Well, that's a great overview. An intro. We're going to get into some more detailed videos
Sure.
that we'll be putting up on our website, but
Yeah.
that's awesome. Thank
I just
you.
think, though, that everybody needs to understand that even though you think you may be exempt here in Texas, in other states you're not. And it's truly the incorporation of that mortgage loan originator into the transaction to process the buyer. And it's getting, you don't have to be an expert in the industry, but you should at least have a good feel for what an RMLO is and what they do and what their role is.
And we always run our people through an RMLO because a lot of times we sell our notes, and most note buyers won't buy a package unless it's been processed.
In today's compliance industry, I think that's extremely important. Ever since the incorporation of the SAFE Act and the Dodd-Frank Act came into play, people want to know that all the rules and compliance issues are being met. And the RMLO is what helps us cross that threshold. I call it idiot-proofing the transaction, because by incorporating that RMLO into the transaction, we know that we're meeting the requirements of the SAFE Act. We know we're meeting the requirements of RESPA along the way. It allows us, if we're the investor, to make that final decision based upon what Dodd-Frank says we are supposed to consider and verify the financial information provided by the borrower. So from there, I hope that helps everybody out with the RMLO and their role in the creative finance industry.
Okay, thank you.